All right, everybody. I want to welcome you to the 12th episode of the Wandering Thoughts podcast. Today I'm very grateful to have Brian Sachetta. I said that right, right?
You got it.
All right. He is the author of two books. One is, actually, I have this pulled up, so I wouldn't do this. One is, the book we're going to be discussing a bit more heavily is Get Out of Your Head, Volume 2, Navigating the Abyss of Depression. He reached out to me after I advertised a bit, and at first I was like, "Oh, great, another person wanted to discuss depression," and then I went ahead and listened to some of the podcasts he was on, and I was struck by his ability to articulate what he was talking about and how uh, how his own experiences tied into the things he discovered. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Brian, if there's anything you want to say, and as for introducing yourself, feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Joseph. You've kind of said it already. Brian Sachetta, blogger, author, and owner of a company and a book series called Get Out of Your Head, which just it seeks to help folks overcome different mental illnesses, including anxiety and depression. So glad to be here tonight and excited to jump into some of the content.
Sweet, man. I'm going to start us off with the most cliche of cliche questions, and that's why did you write the books? I mean, what prompted you to write the books? I mean, like I said before we got started here, a lot of people, when they go through depression, their first thought isn't, I should write a book, I should share this with the world. It's, I need to get through this, and then maybe I'll help a friend or two or a stranger or something with a kind word or something like that. So what led you to write the books?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I definitely have I have an answer for sure, but when you ask it and you say it that way, it's like, not everybody would have that reaction in terms of, hey, this is what I'm going to go do after I've dealt with something. That definitely resonates with me, and I guess let me jump into the story, and then maybe I can talk about some of the nuances.
Yeah.
But so I would say throughout most of my teenage years, and then also it still goes on a little bit, but I've gotten a lot better at it. So I would say probably somewhere between like 16 and 30 or 16 and 28, dealt a lot with anxiety. And I don't really know what it is. There's something in me that, like, when I first dealt with anxiety, I had this curiosity to be like, okay, I know that I could go to the doctor. I know that I could see a talk therapist, and we could go down this long procession of, like, I go to the doctor every week, or I go to psychiatrist every couple of weeks, or whatever. And I'm not saying that folks should not do that. They absolutely should, if they think that that's going to be helpful, and they should try it out, and they should see if it's helpful. I did do that a little bit, but I also just had, like, for me, it was such an urgency thing where, on the anxiety side, where it really kicked into gear was when I started, like, dating a little bit, or like seeing different women in my life. I mean, I say women just because I'm 30 now, but this was 18. So, like, I was a guy, I was kind of a boy, and they were girls. And, but it was like, so I had a panic attack with one woman that I was seeing. I think I was probably 17 at the time. And then I had a second panic attack with a girl that I was sort of like courting, if you will, early in college. So that was when I was 18. And I think so for me, like, relationships have always been important, or very important. And, it's like sometimes I'm going to tangent a little bit here, but it's like what I found, like, so initially I'm thinking to myself, like, relationships are really important. I want to be in a relationship where I'm attracted to this girl. So, like, I want to be in a relationship with her, or whatever. And when I experienced, like, to me, I put it up, not on a pedestal, but I was like, this is very important to me, right? This subject. So when I had panic attacks in front of these two girls that I was interested in, it became like, when you're 18, like, girls are kind of like, it's like girls and partying and maybe a little bit of studying. Like, it's kind of your whole world, right? So from that point of frame of reference, if you're like, hey, this is really important to me, and I'm struggling with it mightily, then that you can definitely make the case to say, like, there's a ton of urgency here, and I need to go figure out what it is that I'm dealing with. And then I also got to find some strategies to deal with it. So I guess from that standpoint, I was kind of thinking to myself, like, well, yeah, I mean, I could definitely go to the doctor. I could get medication. I could do talk therapy, like some of those different things. Maybe even at the time, I didn't know all the details of what was possible. But for me, it was just like, and I'll like jump into one of the stories a little bit was, and I think you've heard it on a previous podcast, but I was like, again, I was courting this one girl at college. It was early on in college. I'll kind of fast forward or tell the story quickly, just for folks who have heard it before. But this girl texted me and she was like, "Hey, I'm coming over." And I could tell that she had been drinking and I hadn't. And, I'm, at the time definitely was like an anxious person. And so I start getting into my head thinking about like, oh my goodness, how is this going to go? What could go wrong? Whatever. Fast forward, she comes over. I'm super nervous. She sits down next to me and she feels that like my heart is racing and I'm shaking and whatnot, and just like totally freaks out on me. And I guess I want to preface and just say like, this is definitely not like hey, I'm like trying to badmouth this person at all. This was just my experience. Right. And so she ended up like, screaming at me, calling me all these different names, running away, being like, never talk to me again, whatever. And I was that like really, really, it hurt, it was like, here's this girl that I thought like, oh man, like maybe we could date or something. Right. And it's like, I'm very interested in her. And like, it for an 18-year-old, it's a little bit of like your worst nightmare. I mean, obviously, in the grand scheme of things, not necessarily that big a deal, right? Like, I think you get older, you realize it's like, okay, like I've got my family and I've got my friends, and like so much worse, so many more worse things could happen, right? But at the time, it felt like a really big deal, and so that urgency, like it was like I woke up the next day and I was like, I don't have time to like call a therapist and like wait a month to be taken in and then do all these appointments. I was like, I got to figure this out right now. And so I started looking just into the different literature, and this was 2008, so there just wasn't as much content out there, not as many bloggers, not as many independent authors and whatnot. But I found whatever information I could find online, and I was like, I'm diving into it. And I just started researching. And so I guess stepping back for a second, right? It's like my approach with my brand is sort of like, I am a software developer by trade. And so the kind of spin that I put on things is like, yeah, software development and mental health are not like super related, but I try to make them related. And so in the software development world, there's essentially a concept called A/B testing, where you're like, let's say you have a product, right, or a mobile application or something, and you could say like 50% of my users should see like a button that's blue, and 50% should see a button that's green. And then we're going to see, based on different metrics, like which one is more successful, if you will. Right. So I was basically saying to myself, like, I'm jumping into all this content and I'm going to I'm going to go out and A/B test all these different concepts. So one author says, go out and, recite a mantra to yourself. Another one says, go out and visualize the outcome that you want to occur from a date or something like that. So I would say close to 10 years, I'm trying out all these different strategies. I'm also coming up with some on my own and trying to figure out what works, what doesn't. And I don't know, is like, I guess I'm getting back to the initial question of like, what made me want to write this book? I think, or my books, for me, mental health is just such a personal battle. And also like, it's something that like, it's just like, it's like, it calls to my soul, right? It's not like, oh yeah, I was a little bit anxious on Monday. And then I was a little bit anxious a couple months from then. It's like, I have spent, and this is not I mean, nobody would want to brag about this thing, but this is not a brag. It's just like, kind of setting the stage. It's like, I have spent a lot of time, a lot more time than I would like to admit, in my head, ruminating on different ideas. I would say most of my college life was just straight up rumination. Right. And if I'm being totally honest, that was why for me, like drinking in college, like everybody loves to drink in college, or a lot of people do. But for me, it was like, I can drink and I can turn my mind off, and that is awesome. But I knew as I got older, like it wasn't sustainable, right? And so it just seemed like such a monumental part of my life that I was like, once I figure this out, I'm going to just share my insights with the world. And part of that is a little bit of like, I don't know, it's like you almost have to have this like irrational confidence that like what you are going to share with people is going to resonate with them, right? But at the same time, like I think if you don't have that confidence, or you don't have that like I don't know what the right word is, but it's like that irrationality, like then you won't put the book out, you won't write it, and you won't share it with people, and it won't resonate with them because it won't have come out, right? So again, it was just kind of me like feeling as though like it was some sort of meaning, mission, purpose kind of thing for me. And I was like, this calls to my soul, so I'm going for it.
Right. No, it's like the the call to your soul part resonates with me. It's part of the reason why I started this podcast and why the very first episode I did on this podcast was on depression, because I went through it. Still deal with anxiety and depression a bit off and on. Anxiety far more than depression. I'm always overthinking things. But the whole reason why I started this podcast was, hey, let's have open, honest discussions with people, especially people who don't agree with each other. And then I went through a depressive state and I was like, I don't necessarily want to go on medication because I've seen too many studies on the side effects. We don't have long-term studies on, hey, what happens if you take this antidepressant for 9 months or 3 years or so forth? Because a lot of people just don't expect to be on it that long, and then they are because the body gets dependent and all that. And I was like, okay, what have I discovered during my journey? And I shared it within that first episode. Granted, there were a few things in there that I was stressing way too heavily, like electronics and technology are so bad for you, you should find a way to quit it completely. And now I'm like, moderation is key. But I really like how you spoke you spoke of deciding to do it because almost an irrational confidence, right? Because you felt that that was so personal to you that there were other people out there who might need that same story, right? That same help to get through it without having to go see a million doctors and get diagnosed with 3 different disorders and take a ton of drugs before they find something that works, right? I don't know about you, but a lot of doctors don't really recommend things like more sunlight. They recommend, here, let's try this antidepressant real quick to make sure that you don't off yourself, which in a lot of cases it's a mixed bag. But one thing that really stood out to me was, like, you said you didn't want to go see a therapist and you didn't want to wait that time. That's interesting because a lot of people's first response is, shoot, I'm really depressed and I can't stop ruminating on all these bad thoughts. I should go see a therapist. I should go to my pediatrician and get recommended to, whether it's a therapist or a specialist in a psychiatrist, something like that, who can prescribe me antidepressants. So I'm curious, and I'm not I'm not trying to say antidepressants are bad all around, but I'm just curious, what do you think about antidepressants? What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I think sort of touching upon what you just finished saying was like the medical field and like the way that doctors operate and whatnot. Like it's a complicated thing. I think, and I'm going to get back to the initial question, but right, it's like it is if somebody comes in and I guess it's like somebody comes into the office and it's like, hey, the way that the system is set up is like, you have 30 minutes with me. And so if you want help, like we can't, we're not budgeting 6 hours to have a deep, soulful conversation here. Right. It just kind of is what it is. I'm not saying that it's good or bad or anything like that. That's just kind of the state of the world. And so it's like, one is in 30 minutes, because you can't have that deep conversation and really get there. Like, I mean, talk therapy, if you wanted to go down that route, people would tell you it takes a long time, right? You got to find the right clinician and develop a relationship with them and trust. And then it takes time to have those insights. And then also, like, when it comes to, if you're just trying to go into the doctor's office and say like, hey, I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with me or whatever. I'm definitely not like casting judgment or anything like that. It's just easier for a doctor to say like, here you go. Like, I know what you're feeling. So like, here's some medication. Going back to the original question is like, how do I feel about it? And also talking about my initial answer and kind of how you were like, you had alluded to how I mentioned like, oh yeah, Brian didn't want to like go to a doctor or whatever. When you're 18, it's a little different than when you're 30, right? It's like when I was 18, like, I mean, I was not an idiot, but like kind of, right? It's like, oh no, I'm like in my mind, I'm like, I'm just going to go to the gym and I'm going to lift a ton and like, that'll get rid of my anxiety or whatever. Right. And it's like, I just didn't have a ton of life experience. I didn't know. As I've gotten older and I've read more research and talked to more people, my take on medication is this. I think that we probably over medicate in general in the US, but at the same time, medication can be incredibly helpful for a lot of people, and it can also save a lot of people's lives, and kind of something that you alluded to as well. So I don't really have any qualms with it. I mean, if you don't feel well, if you're like, hey, I have thought this through. This isn't like I posted something on Instagram and only 5 people liked it and I was hoping I'd get 100. Like, if this is something that you deal with on a regular basis and you're like, I actually need help, then like by all means, talk to your doctor, get medicated, see how that works. But then also, like give it some time, talk to your doctor and figure out what if you take like an SSRI, right? It's not going to work overnight. That's just how the drugs are. Like that's how the chemistry works. So it might take a month to kick in. It might take 2 months to feel the effect. So work with your doctor on that timeline, and then also, be honest with them. And, after whatever the appropriate amount of time is, say like, hey, this is working, so let's keep doing it. Okay, this is not working, so let's try a different drug, or let's change the dosage or whatever. I'm not a doctor, so I can't give those recommendations. All
Right.
I can say is like, lean on your trusted, on your medical professionals, and but also like listen to yourself, right? Don't put yourself in a situation where it's like, oh, I don't like medication, so I'm just going to ditch it. Because obviously like your doctor doesn't want you to do that. And they have seen a lot of different patients and they know some of the outcomes. So listen to them and trust them. Right. But at the same time, listen to yourself. If you feel that medication, you've been taking it for, as long as your doctor has told you to, and it's not working, then share that information. So that's my take. I do ramble a little bit. So I probably repeated things a few times, but it's like, yeah, you got to do what you got to do. It's one of those things where it's, I kind of funny anecdote was like, when we were kids, we were like, if we had to go to the bathroom and we were in public, we're like, nope, like, too embarrassing to go to the bathroom, like in this place where I don't like, or at a friend's house or whatever. And then I remember like my dad was like, at some point in your life, you get old enough and you're just like, I have to go to the bathroom. Like, who cares? You know what I mean? Like, I'm putting myself first. And so it's like with the medication thing, it's like maybe you're 18 and you're like, no, like screw medication or whatever. You get old enough and you're like, or just you've had enough experience with depression or something where you're like, dude, I have to do what I have to do. And whatever it is, like, I'm going to get healthy,
Right. No, I agree to an extent. I feel like we put way too much emphasis on medicating a symptom instead of looking for a solution, which is part of the reason why I decided to go down the let's figure out how depression works and then the ways the human body just naturally fights it off. So like I said, I'm not against medicine. I know antidepressants have their place, but at the same time, a lot of doctors have this wonderful ability to go, oh, here's a list of symptoms you gave me. I'm going to prescribe this particular pill for you, and that will numb your symptoms while the underlying problem still exists. And in a lot of people, they definitely need antidepressants, especially in people who have no underlying cause. Like, let's say they're healthy, they work out, they get the sunlight they need, they eat good food, they don't eat too many carbs. It's interesting to note that an excess of carbs and refined sugars led to an increase in depression and anxiety, mainly because it caused swelling in the brain, which is fascinating because what is an American diet? A standard American diet is largely
Yep.
carbs and heavily processed foods, and we've ditched things like raw vegetables or just steamed vegetables, and we've skipped out on a lot of the healthy meats. Like eating a hamburger from McDonald's isn't exactly particularly healthy for you. That thing is cooked in oil, and oil when cooked turns into unhealthy fats. Uh, it's slapped on a bun, which is heavily processed wheat if you're lucky, and then you eat it along with some pickles and some bacon, which is again high in unhealthy fats. Uh, but it is interesting to see, like, I mean, we have two different perspectives on this, and it's interesting that we're not like, screaming at you like, hey, no, doctors only, or like, no, natural medicine only. But I am curious as to why you wrote the book on depression, because when you explained why you wrote the book, you wrote it on it sounded like you were talking specifically about the book on anxiety, because you had several you listed several anxiety stories of yours. I'm curious, what led to the book on depression? Was there anything that you experienced in life that was depression related, or was it something else?
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely, yeah, in the first answer there, I definitely only talked about the anxiety side of things. So the story around the second book, and I guess like looking at the author journey or my author journey, I really didn't plan to write the second book. I was like, hey, you know what? Anxiety is the thing that I deal with the most. And I wrote the book. I feel like I quote unquote figured it out or whatever, right? I made some progress and I wanted to share those insights with the world. In 2018, when I was getting ready to publish that book, I remember like, I don't know the exact moment, but I remember like kind of being in this phase of getting ready to publish the book and being like, hey, this is awesome. Like I figured this all out, and mental health, like we're done here or whatever. Right. And slowly realizing that I was in a depressive state And to me, I guess it was just so surprising. I naively thought that I had learned all these different strategies and kind of had my mental health in order. And I guess in some ways, to be totally honest, I kind of felt like a fraud. I was like, I'm about to publish this book on anxiety and mental health, and I'm not mentally healthy right now. And so that threw me for a total loop. And then also just in general, like kicked off this new journey, right? It was like, I don't want to compare like anybody's, I don't want to say like, hey, I suffered the worst depression ever, or whatever, right? To me, what I went through was very difficult. But that's not to say that I can compare it to anything that anybody else has been through. I just know that like, I'm 30 at this point, I'm 31, and I know that the bout that led to me writing the book was definitely the most difficult thing that I've ever gone through. It was a little bit over a year long. I would say somewhere in the range of, I don't know, 6 months or something like that. I kind of dawned on me that I was like, look, if I'm getting up every day and I feel like absolute garbage, and it's not even, it wasn't even like, oh, I'm tired kind of thing. It was like, it was almost this like, I'm trying to find the right words. There were so many different factors involved, but a lot of it was like, I'll give you the backstory, to be totally honest, like kind of like what kickstarted this. And also I got to jump into the book a little bit, like the framework of the book, just so it makes sense. So what I ended up doing was I did a lot of research, and I found what I thought like one, essentially a framework for like not either diagnosing or saying where diseases come from. And it's the biopsychosocial model from George Engel and John Romano out of the University of Rochester. They made it in, I think, the 1970s. And it's sort of just like a holistic framework that says, the way that diseases arise, it's not just like hey, you have a chemical imbalance and that's it, right? It's not just like your body is messed up, so fix the body. It's like these three buckets. And so biopsychosocial, if we expand it out, it's biological, psychological, and social. And so their thought was like, each one of those categories can, like, when we have deficiencies, I guess, in each of those categories, or like, I guess, so let's say like on the psychological side, right? It's like if we're constantly thinking dark, negative thoughts, and our beliefs are telling us bad things about ourselves in the world, that's one place where we could like find an entry point into depression. At the same time, if we, on the social side, like if we don't like our jobs, if we don't like our friends, if we recently lost somebody that we love, like that's another way that we can enter depression. On the biological side, you alluded to it earlier, where it's like getting good sunlight, eating the right foods and whatnot. So it's like sometimes we can fall into depression by like one major event. So for example, if like, our wife divorces us, or somebody that we love passes away, that could very easily just send us right into depression. But there's also sort of like a death by 1,000 paper cuts entry point into it, where it's like, okay, I don't necessarily, it doesn't all hit me at once, but it's like, oh geez, eventually I realize, yeah, I'm not really where I want to be in my career. I don't have that many close friends. I'm isolated. I'm thinking dark thoughts all the time. My vantage point on the world, like I have the wrong beliefs and I'm thinking dark thoughts. Like all of those things can combine to create this synergistic effect that we know as depression. And so eventually I, did a bunch of research or read a lot of different books and journal articles and whatnot, and kind of came to say like, hey, I want to take this holistic view that George Engel and John Romano took with their framework, and I want to apply that to depression in my own life, in my battles. And so for me, it was like sort of understanding over time. And again, it was like, I didn't know that I was depressed right away. It took me a while to figure that out. And then it took me even longer to figure out like some of the things that were bad for my mind. I will talk a little bit about the story itself, because it might be interesting to folks, but also the whole story is in the book. So it was like in 2018, trying to remember the exact entry point. It was like one of the first things that kicked in was like, I had this event. So there's where my parents live, there's a fair that comes every year. And it's a pretty big one in Massachusetts. Like everybody kind of knows the name, and a lot of people go. It's, it's like, it's a little bit of like honky tonk or whatever, but we've been going for a long time and it's fun. And, at this age, like you take like the nieces and nephews and whatnot. But so we went there with my nephew, and had one of those like strange moments where it really hits you all at once, like the emotions of it, where like I took him on a specific ride and just going around on this carousel, I'm thinking to myself, like, holy crap, like my mom took me on this ride and I remember it. I definitely like remember that. And that was probably 23 years ago or something like that, or 20 years ago, right? It's like now I'm taking my nephew on it. And to me, it wasn't like, oh, this is like awesome, magical kind of thing. It was like terrifying. It was like, holy crap. Like I feel as though my life is like flying by before my eyes.
Right.
And then, later on that day, I had this thing that kind of like freaked me out, where I basically got like somebody, a scammer emailed me and, said that they were going to like basically ruin my life. And I was like, so I'm freaking out about that. And then later on that day, or that night, I went online and I stumbled into this article that talked about climate change and how like it was an alarmist kind of article,
Right.
where it was like, hey, if we don't change how we live and work, like we're all dead in like 10 or 20 years. And so that actually all happened on the same day. And so that was a lot to process, honestly. And it really hit me pretty hard, where I don't know, just so many different emotions and almost kind of this like totally freaked out state to like, oh my goodness, I have no idea what to do. Like I'm totally dejected, or like I just feel hopeless,
Yeah.
And so because of that day, I fell into my head for a really long time. And then I started thinking about climate change and, if we could really pollute the planet to the point of annihilation. And then like, I just went so far deep into my head that it wasn't remotely healthy. It was really, really bad. And I'm thinking about life and death and the significance of all of that and whatnot. And I guess like, for better, like for one reason or another, like, that kind of kickstarted me feeling really bad and thinking about scary things all the time, existence itself and whatnot. And it took me a long time to realize that, like, the more that you question scary things and negative things, like you don't ever get to the point of being like, yeah, I figured it out, I solved it, I feel good now. You just feel worse and worse. And so eventually, like as I was saying, as I went into the research phase, I started realizing like I gotta stop going down these paths, right? And then to bring it all back to like the biopsychosocial model, for me, it was like I had just gotten a new job as a remote software developer, and it was kind of one of those jobs where it's like, it was very, very cushy, like almost like golden handcuffs kind of thing. It was like most people would probably, I don't know if kill for the job is the right word, but it's like I was making a nice salary and working from home, and it wasn't a very busy job. Like it wasn't too demanding or anything like that. But like from the biopsychosocial standpoint, it was like, I used to walk to work and I got a lot of exercise in walking, and that helped me clear my head a lot. Now I'm working from home every day, and my roommates weren't around because they had different things going on in their lives, living at girlfriends' houses or whatever. So I was very isolated in that regard. And then from the psychological standpoint, it was like, the more that you're isolated, the easier it is to be alone with your thoughts. And if you're already, you have these tendencies to go into dark and depressive ideas, the more that you're isolated, the more that is likely to happen. And then from a social standpoint, it was like, I really didn't actually like this job, even though, so the scary thing was like, I had told myself, if I can just get this job, I'll be happy. Right. And it was this shocking thing to me where it was like, almost like a grieving kind of thing. It was like, oh, Jesus, like, and sorry, I
No, you're
didn't
good,
mean,
man.
it was like, I thought that it was some sort of disillusionment, right? Where it was like, I said that was going to make me happy. And to be honest, this is the worst I've ever felt in my life. And so it was just a total like calamity of not knowing what to do, an existential kind of crisis. And that was what really led me to be like, at a certain point, I said to myself, I have finally realized it. Like, this is the battle of my soul. And once I make some progress here, we're going back in, we're writing another book. So again, another long-winded one, but that was the journey.
Gotcha. No, that's all good. You hit on several things there. One of which, um, you mentioned part of the reason why you went down that spiral was climate change, and I've heard a bit about it recently. Specifically, how the alarmist articles that say, "Oh, we've got 10 years," and then the entire world goes kaboom. Greta Thunberg, essentially her whole teenage years has been around being an activist for climate change. Um, but a massive part of people like in Gen Z and some millennials are just horribly overwhelmed by the thought. that the Earth is going to end in 10 years and it's all their fault and there's nothing they can do about it because, well, they can stop having the water on and they can stop using electricity so much and maybe they get an electric car. That doesn't change all the rest of these 7 billion people on the planet, and it doesn't change the big corporations and all of that. It's like you against the world, but the world actually doesn't really care and can squish you like you're a fly. It's interesting that that's become what is a major driver of depression in today's age. How did you get through that? Like what got you through that state? I mean, it's not easy, especially when you're dealing with different facets like a lack of social life, a lack of exercise, and then a problem that a lot of society has decided is so big that we should drop all else to solve it.
Yeah. How did I get through it? I think in a lot of ways, like I don't have like a magic framework of like, boom, there I did
No,
it.
of
Right.
course not.
It's more of going back to that biopsychosocial model. It's
Mhm.
more like, okay, taking stock of where I am. If we were to say like each of them is like a graph or something, like if it's a bar chart and we say to ourselves like, here's 0 and here's 10 on the biological scale, I'm at a 3 out of 10. And so we're trying to figure out where we are in all these areas. It was kind of just like slowly building those worlds back up, to be totally honest.
Mhm.
I think one thing that did help me a lot, if I'm, again, being totally honest, is I I have found that work for me, if the work is meaningful, or at the very least engaging, that is like super therapeutic to me.
Mhm.
And so for like one of the things that I realized during that battle was like, so I got this new job. Again, I'm working from home. Like the people that I worked with were awesome. They were super nice people. The problem was the project was like had a lot of red tape holding it up. So it was like we would sit around and be like, hey, like project manager, anything to do today? Kind of not. Like, I'll let you know.
Right.
And it's so hard to complain. It's like I was getting paid the whole time to kind of just sit there. So it's a very first world problem, but at the
Mhm.
same time, like nobody wants to just sit there and let their time pass by and do like have nothing to show for it, right?
Do
Like people
nothing
want to
that
be
supports nobody.
engaged.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're
Yeah,
doing something that doesn't support anybody, whether it's yourself or makes life better for anybody else, or even just makes you money while you're doing something, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't sit well with what seems to be an ingrained sense of most human beings' conscious.
exactly. And even that is definitely a big factor. And then it's like even from just a productivity standpoint, like the mark I'm leaving on the world, or even
Mhm.
in some small capacity, right? It's like even if like so I'm a software developer, it's like even if I build a mobile app and like 200 people use it or 500 people use it, it's like at least those people used it and I
Right.
can point to that. But if it's like I just got paid to do nothing, like literally nothing, I just had to
Mhm.
sit at my computer and be there if people needed me, you can't point to anything. It feels like a waste, and then all of a
Right.
sudden you go into if you let your mind go there, you think to yourself like, I'm wasting my life, I'm wasting my time, like what is going on here? So that was a, like, I guess, again, going back to the biopsychosocial model, it was like from a social standpoint, I realized once I got over the shock of being like, hey, I don't actually like this job very much, I found a new project that eventually helped me like jump back in, kind of like sink my teeth into and be engaged in it. And for me, that is like one of the most therapeutic things in the world, right? If you have something that you can focus on and just think about, and obviously it's a spectrum, right? It's like you don't want to think about it too much and be all the way stressed out, but at the same time you don't want to be like sitting there twiddling your thumb. So if you're kind of in the middle there, like, and you can find flow, or a flow state, like that can be so good for your mind. So that was one of the things. On the biological side, I felt like, again, was in my apartment a lot, wasn't walking to work, wasn't clearing my head through walking. So that once I realized that, I started like downloading a lot more podcasts and audiobooks and being like, every morning I'm getting up, I'm going for a walk, I'm listening to audiobooks, I'm listening to podcasts, maybe some music here and there or whatever, but like minimum of 30 minutes every day, possibly an hour. And
Right.
it depends on where you live. Like in Boston in the winter, that's so much harder. But in the
Yes,
summer,
it
like
is.
I'm walking like 2 hours a day. And I love that.
Mhm.
Um, and then on the psychological side, right, it was like I knew that because I was isolated because of my job, and I wasn't, my roommates weren't around, and I just wasn't engaged in anything. It gave me more time to go down the rabbit hole in my mind, or to I don't know, gets pulled back into the abyss, if you will. And so it was really like, it's an unsexy answer, right? Because I think people want to be like, hey, like what's again, the magic pill? It's with depression, it's like, you got to build up all those worlds again. And it takes a long time sometimes. And I know that's not the answer that people want to hear. It could be shorter. It could be a shorter amount of time if you're diligent and you have all the insights and you do the tough inner work. But building, biological, psychological, social worlds, rebuilding them, it can take time. So again, that it was kind of just a slow, methodical process of me digging into those things and being like, I got to fix some of this stuff.
Right. And it's really interesting that you're the one who took responsibility for that, and you didn't allow that to be, you didn't allow yourself to blame the job. You didn't allow yourself to blame your family or the big elites. You decided to, be like, okay, what's going on? Why is this happening? Let's look at this from a logical perspective. What have I not been doing? What have I been doing? What thoughts have I identified that lead to this general feeling of hopelessness, right? And then not just identifying them, but attacking them slowly. And that's another thing that I've had to remind myself of constantly is it's not a process that happens overnight. And if anyone believes that, you're in serious trouble, right? Because there is no way that you're going to be able to be depression free overnight. Like pills don't work that way. Unless God like snaps his fingers and does a complete miracle overnight, which doesn't happen very often, you're not going to get better the next day. I mean, a good night's sleep is really important to your mental health. I recently found out that REM sleep is what allows us to strip the emotions from traumatic memories. And if we don't get REM sleep, we don't strip that emotion. That's why a lot of people with PTSD have PTSD, because they haven't been getting the REM sleep, because the bad memories triggered being unable to sleep because of anxiety, making it hard to go to sleep. And then that made it so they couldn't get the REM sleep they needed so that they could strip the emotions from the traumatic memories. And I was fascinated by
Vicious
that.
cycle.
I was like, how do we fix that? Like for people with PTSD or just general people with depression and anxiety, sleep really helps, but not too much sleep. Because if you sleep 10 hours, just like if you go to bed and you just decide to sleep and not wake up until you just wake up, that puts the brain in a state of, when are we sleeping? When are we waking up? What is our life like? The human brain needs routine, and that's something you hinted at with, I'm gonna go for a walk. If it's too cold out, a minimum of 30 minutes. We got to hit 30 minutes. If we don't hit 30 minutes, it's not enough. It doesn't help us, whatever. And it's different for every person. I know a general rule of thumb is to get like 30 minutes of sunlight a day, which could be a 30-minute walk. It could be a run or a jog. It could be broken up in like 5-minute segments. Like you work, you're like, all right, guys, I'm taking a 5-minute break, and go outside, right? Or if you say you work a 9 to 5 at a convenience store or something, take your lunch break, sit outside for a few minutes, something like that. But it's interesting that you point out that routine was helpful in the way that you got things done.
Yeah, I think it's monumental. I mean, it's one of those things where, looking back on it, I kind of worry, and I actually talk about it in the book. Is I think a lot of people have this idea of, hey, eventually I'll make $10 million and I'll go sit on a beach somewhere and I'll be good for the rest of my life. I'll be happy forever. Eventually I will retire. I'll never, screw the man. I'll never work another day in my life. I'll be happy. And there's studies out there that show that a lot of retirees are actually pretty darn unhappy. And I think there's a lot of different reasons why, but one of them, as you're alluding to here, is like the structure, right? It's like when we have routine and we're able to like push through some difficult things, like, maybe we don't want to wake up early and go to work, but we do that. And then that allows us to enjoy the downtime a little bit more, right? It's like when we're sitting around all the time, it's like, if you ask me, sitting on my couch and watching TV for like 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, that sounds like absolute hell. Sitting on a beach until I die sounds awful. Do I want to do those things in moderation? As we talked about earlier, it's like, I absolutely do. But doing that a lot, that would break my structure and kind of the routine of my day. And my routine keeps me, it's almost like these day type compartments. I think it was, what the heck was his name? Dale Carnegie, I believe, talks about that. It's like that keeps my mind within, kind of puts like the bumpers on the bowling alley of like, keeps the ball of my mind from going into the gutter.
Right.
And then, one other thing that you pointed on was like the, kind of wanting to take responsibility, or like taking responsibility for where I was in life and whatnot. this is, I don't know, it could be it's not going to be controversial, but like there are definitely some folks out there, and it's like, hey, look, it's, I come from like a relatively wealthy town. Like, it's like, I don't know what it's like to be, poverty stricken or something like that. But the way that I approach responsibility is like, depression is a disease marked by helplessness and hopelessness. And so if I say to myself, I'm not responsible for this, that person is, guess what? I am helpless and I'm going back into depression because there's nothing I can do about it. So
Right.
even if it feels like there's nothing, it's like, I'm going to claw my way into responsibility and be like, I'm going to take that route because I know that I can sink my teeth into it and I can try to find some alleviation that way. I just find that whenever I put myself in that mindset of like being completely disempowered, that's a lot worse for my mental state.
Yeah, I hear you 100%. You mentioned work and how it's really important for you. It's interesting because without purpose, people don't really have the will to live. It's like if I don't have a reason to get up in the morning, if I don't have a reason to interact with my family, like if you don't have a reason to interact with your family, that's some deep introspecting you got to do, and then take some action on that. But without purpose, man has a hard time existing. And uh, from my own religious perspective, in Genesis, God writes that He created man to work. Man was designed to go to work and bring the bread home, but essentially to work. We were designed to work, and not every day. There's a reason why God gave us at least one day to rest, and commanded us that we have to take that one day to rest. It's because if you overwork, you're exhausted, you burn out. There's a chance for anxiety and depression to come in because you're not sleeping enough, you're not eating right, none of that. But at the same time, without purpose, without work, what is life? And I think it's interesting that you note that because a lot of Western societies really stress the get rich quick, don't do anything else with the rest of your life, or hey, if you don't want to work, it's fine. The government can give you money. Just if you don't want to work, sit on the couch, buy a 58 to 60 to 80-inch flat screen TV, enjoy your life, become obese because you don't work out and you eat heavily processed foods. And if you get depressed, we'll give you an antidepressant and there's no worries. And growing up, my family, my dad specifically taught me the value of hard work. If you don't put the work in, you're not going to get anything out of it. Very frequently, when I'd be like complaining about schoolwork and everything, he'd be like, Joseph, do the hard thing first. Because then as you go through it, it gets easier and more fun, and then you can just be done with it. And a lot of cultures, Western cultures specifically, don't have that anymore. It's very much so a mentality of do the easiest thing you can possibly find and make a lot of money off that, and then go live your life. But at the same time, I think there is something to be said for working a job you do actually love and taking the chances. The chance it's a massive risk to go, you know what? Okay, I've been working this job at, let's say, Walmart for 6 years. What if I go try construction? Maybe that's something I'll enjoy. What if I go try to be a YouTuber of some sort or a podcaster? It's a risk. And I'm not saying you should quit your job and go be a podcaster. Like that's not reasonable. I work a job outside of doing this podcast. It's not reasonable to be like to do such things. But risk taking is huge. It's a fundamental part of being human. If we don't take the risk, we don't learn anything new. And let's face it. If you mentioned it again with your job, if you're not doing something challenging, if you're not doing something new or meaningful, doesn't feel like there's a reason to do it. And it's interesting to see that that's a common connection between people who are trying to get through depression or have gone out the other side, and they look back and like, yeah, having a job I enjoy, and more than that, having a job that gives me purpose and that gives me a reason to do it is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you wholeheartedly on all those things. And I think like on the purpose side, right, there's sometimes like a capacity or a desire for folks to say like, what is my like grand purpose in life, right? Like why exactly, for what specific reason did God or the universe or whomever put me on this earth? I think I'm not saying that that's like the worst thing in the world. Like it is good to have the idea of like, I want to find purpose, but I think we don't always necessarily need to be that profound. I think purpose can be found in like the intersection of the things that we're interested in, the things that we're talented in, and also like the way that we give back to people, right? So it's like I could find purpose in a job where I create a mobile app that helps people a little bit. that, uses my, like, I get to use my software skills to be able to create this thing. And then the app is in a category, or the subject of the app is something that is semi-interesting to me, right? It's like I can find purpose there, and that gets me out of bed in the morning because I want to go help more people. I want to push out more features, whatever. Purpose is so important, I guess. For folks though, it's like if you're getting caught up on like, oh, I haven't figured out what my like life's purpose is just yet, it's like maybe give yourself a little more like space, or like don't be so hard on yourself, right? It's like find things that you're interested in, and then I think the sense of purpose will come.
Definitely. Especially a lot of young teens, young adults, I should say older teens, young adults, as they, 18, 19, everybody's saying, "Hey, what are you doing in college? What's your goal? What's your major going to be? Are you going to go into a trade school? What is it that you want to do with your life?" And at 18, I don't think we're we're quite ready to figure that out. I think at 18, we're trying to figure out who we are. Who is, for example, who is Joseph? What does he enjoy? What do I enjoy doing? What are my hobbies, my interests? What do I get passionate about in a conversation? What do I just go on a tirade for 30 minutes straight in a heightened sense because I love it so much, right? What do I believe? What are my beliefs? Religious, political, whatever it is. And that's something that develops over many years. I don't know anybody who's 80 years old who has it all together. I mean, growing up, one of my best friends was my neighbor. She was 85 years old. And one of my favorite things to do was go over to her house and just listen to her wisdom. And sometimes we'd watch TV shows together, and sometimes we would just sit there and talk for hours on end. But she didn't even have it all together. She didn't discover she loved painting till she was 75 years old. And then after like 5 years, arthritis took her ability to paint away. But her paintings were gorgeous. But she had never known. Thankfully, she was at an age where she could use technology and learn how do I paint? What type of paint should I use? Things like that. But passions come and go. I mean, one day you're 18, you go to college for being a lawyer. 10 years later, you're like, you know what? This just doesn't cut it anymore. I get out of bed and I dread going to work. And you find something else, what if it's construction or YouTube, something like that, and you pursue that until you can make it work. But passion, you're right. Pursuing purpose like it's the holy grail and there's only one size fits you is inaccurate. That's never been the case across all of human history, unless you look at Jesus. But there hasn't been one person who's had one purpose their entire life. Not even the people who, let's say, for 40 years after they turned like 30, they still had to figure out what's going on. Who am I? Why am I doing this? And there's a reason why there's like 3 to 5 midlife crises. Like when you're 60 years old, 40 years old, 18, in your 20s, they're there because it's a new stage of life. 18 to 19, you're becoming an adult. Who am I? What's the world look like? What is my place in the world? That's a big question, is what is my place in the world? Because a lot of people say you should just go work. And work is important. I will never knock work. As much as I might be lazy sometimes and not want to go to work, be like, oh, I gotta get up and go to work today. Without work, we're not really who we were meant to be. I mean, without work, it's like we mentioned before, it just doesn't feel like you're human anymore. Well, what purpose do you have? Um, I am curious though. You again, you touched on climate change. How did you get through that one very specifically? How did you go from life sucks because we're all going to die in 10 years to being, and not necessarily comfortable with it, because I feel like that the word comfortable gets thrown around way too much. But just getting to a place where it didn't cause you to be really anxious about it all the time.
Yeah, I would say I thought of three things. Let me see if I can remember all of them. One of them was like doing what I felt I could to combat it a little bit. And we did, you had mentioned like one of the difficulties is that you quickly realize like what you as an individual can do kind of gets dwarfed by the world, all these different countries, all these different companies and whatnot. But at the very least, like from an integrity standpoint, right, I can say I lived the way I wanted to. I didn't pollute all the time. Like, sure, we may all be going down, but it's not because of me.
Right.
And I don't know, maybe there's some selfish standpoint in there or whatever, but I just felt like, yeah, it was more of an alignment. It was like, I know how I want to live and how I would like other people to live. So I should be in alignment with that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was definitely one thing. I think another thing was kind of you read that first alarming article and that sends you like way off into the abyss, and you're just like, again, I mean, that literally, if I had to take one specific thing out of that whole episode, which lasted, over a year, if I hadn't thought about climate change, I probably wouldn't have gone so far down it. So I guess getting back to my answer was, you read that first article, it really freaks you out. I did a little bit more research, and I don't know, like I don't know what the right answer is, but I think that what I came up with was like, maybe like, it's probably not like, hey, we're all going to die in 10 years. It's probably an issue, but the alarmism, if it's helpful for people to get them to change their behavior, that's great, but it's going to freak a lot of people out. I think both of those things happened for me. Like, it helped me change my behavior, so that was good. But like, yeah, I went through a really, really dark period in my life, so that really stunk.
Right.
Who knows? Maybe that would have caught up with me later on in life. I'm not totally sure. The final, I don't know, prong of my three-pronged approach here was, to be totally honest, like just distracting myself and repressing it a little bit. I was listening to, there's a podcast that's getting a little popular now, Huberman Labs. It's one of the, he's a neuroscientist or something like that. He's a professor at Stanford, and he was quoting, I'm mixing up different things that I was listening to. But anyway, good podcast. If you want to listen, if people want to listen to it, definitely recommend. I was listening to something else, and he was quoting a book, and the guy was basically saying, like, healthy people repress their fears to some degree. And I think that's definitely true, right? It's like, if we woke up every day and all we did was worry about every single thing that could go wrong, like, we'd be so far off the deep end, So to me, it was like, those first two things that I mentioned helped me get to the point where I felt like I could, forget my fears a little bit around climate change, repress them a little bit. And I think you also get to a point, and going back to like the helplessness, hopelessness thing, right? It's like, if when I think about it, I feel helpless, why don't I just try my best not to think about it, know? Because otherwise I'm sort of making my depression worse. I'm expanding upon it. So it's, again, not really a sexy answer there, but you do the best you can, and it's like, you see what works for you in your mental health and your mental state, and then you just dive into the ones that you feel are beneficial.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of fears, like my struggle personally has largely been with overthinking the what ifs of what could happen in a negative sense. So definitely, when you focus on the fear, you don't do anything. And a large part of my teenage years, I've been ill with Lyme disease, knocked me out for a while, which then allowed me to be just a stationary person. My entire life, I've always loved the outdoors. My entire life was go outside, find birds, find plants, have fun, get dirty, come home, eat dinner, go to bed. Like, get so gosh darn tired from being in the woods that I could just eat dinner, satisfactory, watch a TV for like an hour and a half, go to bed, and wake up, do the next thing tomorrow. That was my life. I had Lyme disease, was exhausted. I didn't have the energy to go. I couldn't even go for like a 10-minute walk without being completely tired. Uh, as that ended, I formed an awful habit of just being on my computer all the time. That's all I did. Social life kind of wasn't there. That circle. I didn't have my biological needs weren't met. I wasn't getting exercise. Wasn't getting sunlight. My social needs weren't met, and my thoughts were very much so. Well, if I go outside, I'm going to be exhausted, and I'm going to need like 3 plates of food to get back to a normal state. And so it's like that fear of, what if this bad thing happens? And it was like 2 years ago at this point, I think. That's when I hit my darkest moment. It lasted way too long. The deepest, like the darkest moment of it in and of itself was about 8 weeks of just torture. I would say it was just torture. Um, I never really realized what people thought depression was like, because my entire life I'd been like flirting with it, kind of. My friends had it to an extent, and so I was just kind of blown off. Like, I wonder what depression's like. Maybe they're over exaggerating. And then I had it, like, not just like it's I'm just tired a lot. It was like I couldn't get off the couch. I couldn't. It was just a massive struggle to go eat. Things like that. And I realized that it's hard to describe. It really is. It's like, how do I describe this to people? How do I describe the massively overwhelming hurricane that consistently sits on my chest every single day? You know? Um, but I got through it in a couple of ways. One, just social interaction. I hadn't realized I'd been lying to myself about I'm definitely more of an introverted person compared to a lot of people, but I've been lying to myself regarding how much I needed people. Like my older sister, 100% introvert. Like she goes out to a group of people with a group of people, comes back, she needs to go to bed, just straight off the bat. I come home and I'm like, let's go do something else, man. I'm pumped. And I denied that. I was like, I'm an introvert. That's who I am. I identify as an introvert. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, not identifying as an introvert in specific, but a lot of people go, I have depression, thus I am my depression. I have a health issue. I am my health issue. Things like that. And so once I started hanging out with some friends I'd made, um, they were really supportive. Like I don't think I would have gotten through it quite as well without them. God was a massive part for me. Like he gave me the strength. It was the strangest thing. I was really joyful and peaceful at times during that darkest moment, even though you wouldn't expect that. Especially since like I was being completely candid. A lot of the times I was afraid that I was going to do something that would end my life. Like I didn't have the want to do it, but it was like that thought was just constantly nagging in the back of my head, and it terrified me. It didn't help at all. But once I got through it, that's why I started. That's why the first episode of my podcast was on depression because I was like, I need to figure this out. Um,
Yeah, I mean, we have that commonality there. I didn't apologize to cut you off, but I don't know. I wanted to say like, thanks for sharing your story,
mhm.
and like, a lot of credit to you, man. I mean, it's not easy to get on a podcast, no matter like if you have 100 listeners, 1 million listeners. It's not hard. It's not easy to put yourself out there, you know. So big props to you on that. I think to expand upon, the social part, right? It's like we are such social animals, and unfortunately right now I think COVID is one of them,
Yeah.
and then also just technology and social media. Like we are getting pulled away from our social bonds, and communities are breaking down, right? It's like I say I kind of talk out of both sides of my mouth, where it's like I get disappointed that communities are falling apart, and yet I'm not really doing anything to like foster them or anything like that. But
Right.
it's interesting because I live in Boston, and in the city, it's like there's kind of this like known thing where it's like if you see somebody on the street, you kind of just like almost like a silent agreement where like you both kind of just look the other way.
Hmm.
And in some ways you're like, okay, yeah, I guess we can do that or whatever. And then maybe you go on a side street where it's quieter, and you see someone, you're like, hey, how are you doing? And they smile at you or whatever. And it kind of like makes you feel good. And you're like, wow,
Hmm.
I need some more of that, So there's obviously all sorts of ways that we can get the social interaction, and that's just one really small thing. But I talk about it in the second book, and I also worry about it. Right? It's like I see my young cousins, like if they come over or if I hang out with them, it's like um, they're kind of trained to like be on the phones all the time, be on
Yeah.
Snapchat and whatnot. And I know it's a new generation, so it's a new thing, and they'll figure it out. But I do get worried. Like it's like I know I don't get enough social interaction, and I look at other folks, and I'm like, we are going down a path here that is definitely not good.
No, I agree with you 100%. The main villain of the first episode I did was social media quite large. I did an entire episode after that just on social media in general. Um, I scale back a bit the extremism as which where I was like, you should just not have social media, delete your accounts, all of that's not good for you. Moderation is key, but that's different for every person. Some people cannot handle social media at all. One look at a post and they're just down a rabbit hole of bad thoughts. Um, but yeah, there's the new term that's been coined is called doom scrolling. And it's essentially where I've talked about this a lot, but just to make it brief, it's essentially where you're scrolling through social media and it's all just bad news after bad news. COVID cases have risen. A single person has died from COVID. Oh no, a truck has crashed and killed 3 people. There was a shooting in Philly, things like that. And that our brains are designed to seek out the negative so that we can defend ourselves against it. The issue with that there is the media play off that. Instagram and Facebook specifically have acknowledged that their algorithms play off that. The more negative something is, the more likely they are to push that into people's feeds. And a lot of people are just unaware. They are just blissfully unaware that what they're consuming is negatively harming them. They don't know that too much social media is bad for you in that sense. Um, Especially kids. it wasn't until I was 16 years old that I got my first smartphone. And when I got it, I was like, yes, success. 6 months later, I was like, I want to throw this thing in the trash, man. It's ruining my life. I hate it. And nowadays we need it for work and communicating with people and things like that. But it's such a shocker to me to see my little brother. He's 10 years younger than me, and his entire life has been video games and online stuff. And like I grew up, the favorite thing I did on a rainy day wasn't play video games. It was reading a book or playing with my siblings or building with Legos. That was who I was. That's what I did. And kids don't have that anymore. They lack that physicality of life, or the going outside and hanging with a friend, the talking to somebody on the phone. Like I didn't do that a whole ton, but definitely several times where I had conversations for hours on end on the phone, not texting, but physically talking to the person. And it's just something that's missing. Community is another thing. We can interact with the entire world. I can talk to somebody in Japan if I wanted to, and that's great. That's amazing. But community's gone. A lot of people don't even know their neighbors. I mean, I know my neighbors, but we're on a quiet dead end street. If I didn't know my neighbors, that'd be an issue. I'd be really, really isolated at that point. But go back 100 years ago, and what were people doing? Throwing block parties, having barbecues every now and then, having the whole entire neighborhood over to get to know them. I'm very fortunate that when natural disasters have happened in my area, our entire neighborhood got together. Like one time, our power was out for like 2 weeks because a tiny tornado came through, and we'd gotten a generator for somebody, and my mom couldn't figure out how to work it. My neighbor, without being asked, walked over, was like, "Hey, this is what's wrong. Just do this, and it's good." And to me, that's what community is. You're tight knit enough that when bad things happen, you help each other out. It can go further than that, definitely. Like a church community is where you know everybody, almost everybody. You talk regularly, you get together regularly. But community is degraded because we can talk to anybody we want at any time without the necessity of it being immediate. I can text anybody, and it can be 3 days before they respond because it's a text. And the ruination of community I think it's affected people's minds way more than we give it for.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. And it's a lot of vicious cycles, right? Where it's like one thing feeds another, feeds another, and it is sad. It's like there's a lot of different subjects that we could cover, right? But a couple things. It's like people, I would say in general, like my grandparents were very religious, and their generation was very religious, and no matter who's listening, right? It's like regardless of religious affiliation or what you believe or whatever, like going to church was a way to be part of the community. It was also more than that, but it was like you knew everybody that was in church, and you would have parties afterwards, and that was something that kept the community together. And a lot of parishes are closing, and people just don't believe anymore, and things like that. And I'm not casting judgment. It's like I struggle with what I believe in once in a while, or maybe more than that.
Yeah.
But it's tough because it's like, yeah, you see the communities breaking down, and then you see like all this divisive stuff online. And I do, in my job, it's like as a software developer, I talked about earlier, like A/B testing, where it's like, we are incentivized to figure out what works. And then that drives the bottom line. So we kind of dial those things up. If you look at that from a social media standpoint, I don't totally blame like the news or Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. Like they are in the lab, seeing what works, see what makes them more money. And then they're dialing those things up just like I was.
Right.
I guess the thing that is sad is like at some point you would think that if we saw that the effects were negative enough, that we would scale them back. We'd be like, hey guys, this is like people's mental health. This is like people's physical health. I don't know, like, obviously there have been deaths due to suicide over social media and bullying and stuff like that. And so it's one of those, like, it's hard to pinpoint and say like this happened because of that. But I think we definitely can see a general trend of communities breaking down because of what was the word that I use? Divisive stuff online. And I see it all the time too, where it's like members of not my immediate family, but like the more extended family, even if I go out like a few like second cousins or whatever. And it's like, like all of them like arguing with each other on Facebook about like different politics and whatnot. It's just like, guys, like we're all friends. Like, can we just get in the same room and talk to each other? Like,
Mhm.
I'm not gonna like. Somebody said to me like, there's a concept like dropping the rope in the sense of like you're doing tug of war with these people that you love, and it's like, dude, I'm just gonna like I'm dropping the rope. I'm not fighting back with you. Like I want to go hang out with you. And like if we
Mhm.
have different beliefs, we have different beliefs. But like
Right.
being on Facebook or some social media site where things are amplified, the negativity is amplified,
Mhm.
and like maybe something that has a lot of comments is like sent into people's feeds more often, so it becomes more visible and more people see it. It's like, I don't know, that just it disappoints me, right? It's like you see all these things happening in society, and it's like they're not helping. I wish that I don't know how you save it or how you solve it, but I wish that we could get back to more of a sense of like, you know, we're not fighting over these stupid things, right? We're not arguing with people that we love and ruining relationships.
Mhm.
That it's like, I'm pulling this out of thin air. This isn't true, but it's like, if you go online and all of a sudden, like, your cousin voted for X and you voted for Y, and you're like, hey, if you didn't vote for X, like unfriend me right now. We're never friends again. It's like, what? Like, what even planet are we on? Like,
Right.
you don't have to believe everything that like the people that you spend time with or enjoy or are friends or acquaintances. Like, you don't have to believe everything one on like 100%. And
Mhm.
I don't know, kind of rambling, but I get disappointed with that stuff, and again, it's not helping.
No, I understand completely. Um, it happens a lot, actually. A lot of, let's say, conservatives go, I voted for, let's say, Donald Trump in the last election. Like, and somebody in their family is a leftist or a liberal or a Democrat, however you want to say it, is why I voted for Joe Biden. So you're blocked because you're X, Y, and Z. Uh, I love having conversations with people where we don't agree on everything. It's absolute beauty to me that we can be human beings and have differences of opinion and still be in the same room without throwing cake at each other because we're mad at each other, without banning each other, blocking each other on social media, without banning each other from parties and things like that. Like that was the whole beauty of America was you could come here so you could worship how you wanted to. That was the whole premise. Granted, there was some greed involved with like trading companies that wanted to get rich off gold that was supposed to be here, but that was the main reason why we formed America was we need to have that freedom. Uh,
Yeah. And it's like from a zooming out kind of standpoint, it's like, how do you learn anything new? You
mhm.
hear different and new ideas, some or many of them that might not necessarily coincide with what you think or believe. And you put the two together, you juxtapose them, and you say, does this make more sense? Does that make more sense? If all you're ever hearing is like what you want to hear and things that you already believe, like, you're just in an echo chamber. And that's,
Yeah.
kind of where social media is on some platforms today. So yeah. And then also just, going back to the divisiveness, it's frustrating, right? That like we can't be civil with one another. It's
Hmm.
like, oh, you know, that's like some of losing the humanity, right? It's like,
Hmm.
come on, guys, we're adults, we're better than that.
Yeah. If kids of different skin colors can hang out and play together, I see no reason why we can't have two very supposedly human being adults who are wiser than a bunch of 10-year-olds. There's no reason why they can't just get together in a room, have like a glass of wine, whatever it is, and just have fun, just talk, be human. We all have similar experiences. We all have similar issues. We all worry about finances from time to time. We all have a parent or someone close to us who's going through a hard time. Maybe we're going through a hard time. Life is full of universals. Why focus on the negatives?
Yeah. And I think just like summing it up is like, it kind of comes back to the fact that because the community is broken and we
Hmm.
don't know those things, right? We have kind of forgotten, or like, we're not seeing each other enough to be like, oh, I know all the things that's happening in that person's life. I
Hmm.
am, rooting for them as they go to try to find a new job. I'm praying for that person's mother, they're sick or something like
Hmm.
that. We've missed all of that context. We've lost all of that. And so now we're focusing on, what comes through our news feeds. And most of the time it's just this garbage that's negative. And I think in a lot of ways it feeds back into like societal depression levels, where it's like, because we're not getting that social bonding that we want, because we're seeing negative things all the time, because and those two things are reinforcing one another, the numbers continue to go up. And then obviously like during COVID, where people were stuck in their houses and whatnot, I mean, rates of anxiety and depression went through the roof.
Yeah.
And it was, if you called any psychiatrist, it was like they all had month-long waits, like
Yep.
multiple months. It was very hard to find. a physician. So yeah, I mean, there's a there's a lot of issues going on in the world, and it's probably not going to solve them all today. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, going back to the mental health point, it's just like finding that sense of, even if it's not like a legitimate community, just like a couple people that you
Mhm.
can have a real conversation with and like actually talk about the things that matter to you. Yeah, it's super
Yeah,
important.
definitely. No, I agree, 100%. Uh, where can people come find you? Your books, your information, your website, whatever it is.
Yeah. My website is getoutofyourhead.com. It's like all one word. There's no spaces or dashes. And then on Instagram, it will be Get Out of Your Head Books. Again, no spaces or dashes. I might get a new handle in the future. I get a trademark that is processing right now. So once that finishes, I hope to get a different handle. But
Mhm.
so if folks are listening, it could be Get Out of Your Head in the future on Instagram. But for right now, it's and that is January of 2022. To Get Out of Your Head Books.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. Appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Joseph. And I mean, it was a great conversation. And I hope that a lot of people, can take some things away from it. And again, props to you for being open and honest and just like sharing your experiences. I think we all need a lot more of that.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. All right, everybody. Uh, this has been the Wandering Thoughts podcast. I challenge you to keep thinking, keep learning, and keep up those communities. Until then, until the next one, have a good one.